Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Weekly Reads. So when I signed off from last week's Weekly Reads, I had a bit of a choice to make. Do I continue on with my Pride TBR? I have about 4-5 books left, or do I switch over to history? So the choices were between A Desolation Called Peace by Arkady Martine and Docile by K.M. Szpara, or The Crown and Crisis by Alexander Larman, and A World Beneath the Sands by Toby Wilkinson. I decided to go with the history books. And it was a glorious decision. I had a wonderful reading week this past week. So I started with The Crown and Crisis by Alexander Larman. This is the history of the abdication of Edward VIII, who came to the throne in 1936 and reigned for most of the year but abdicated in December. So he was king for only the better part of a year. And Edward abdicated because he had fallen in love with an American an American divorcee, Wallace Warfield Simpson, and was determined to marry her. And when he could not marry her, either officially as sort of making her queen or morganatically, which would have been a sort of a marriage, but not quite like a fully official marriage, in the sense that she wouldn't have been queen, she would have had some lesser title, and any children resulting from their union would not be heirs to the throne. They would be superseded by George VI, eventually George VI, and Elizabeth. So the Crown and Crisis is basically the events that happened. In really Edward's reign as king, all too brief. And I love this book. This book is really fascinating. It is surprisingly sympathetic to Wallace Simpson, who is usually blamed for everything. And while, yes, she was a gold digger, she didn't intend for any of this to happen. Although she would have liked to probably have been queen, but once it became clear that what happened was going to happen, and also the kind of man her lover was, she did try to get out when the going was good, and she never managed to escape. And Edward VIII is considerably less sympathetically treated. He comes off as, honestly, a bit of a sociopath, if not an outright sociopath. I mean, yes, he was charming, and he could, for a few hours, make that he cared about the plight of common Britons, but ultimately Edward VIII was an incredibly selfish, self-centered monarch who, when he couldn't get his way, decided to cut and run. So this is just really fascinating look at what happened. So there are kind of three things I do have with the book, or three issues with the book. One is Larman never quite goes into what the crisis is rooted in. Why couldn't Edward marry Wallace? What about her made this marriage highly inappropriate? That's never really touched on. Although, of course, I mean, at this time period and before, royal marriages were a thing apart. They were often of equal royal status, signifying diplomatic maneuvering and alliances, as well as that sort of thing. So, royal marriages were not necessarily based on love. And of course, I mean, that tendency continued on through, particularly the British royal family, up until relatively recently. I mean, Charles could not marry Camilla in the 70s when they first met and fell in love because Camilla was not necessarily ideal. She was more experienced than Charles, or she was more experienced than they would have than whoever decides these things, where it's comfortable with, and so it was eventually Diana. But anyway, so yeah, so that was one issue I had. Another one was the role of Cosmo Lang. I thought he was the Archbishop of Canterbury at the time. I thought that his role in this crisis could have been extended a bit and explored further, because he seems like there's something going on, but I'm not entirely sure if it's just me or if further research might reveal something. But anyway, so this was really fascinating, and I loved every moment of this book. And I equally loved every moment with A World Beneath the Sands, The Golden Age of Egyptology by Toby Wilkinson. This is a history of not only the first century of Egyptology, from the decipherment of hieroglyphics by Champollion in 1822 to the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922, but also the history of Egypt itself in this period. And it's a glorious history, just so fascinating, so full of interesting figures and everything. It's just, Wilkinson does a magnificent job looking into the first century of his profession, as well as, again, the history of Egypt in this period and how things developed, and how Egyptology in this period is really a manifestation of imperial longing, of how these young empires of France and Britain and Germany and eventually the United States all come to Egypt seeking validation through studying Egypt, through understanding Egypt, through pillaging Egypt for its antiquities. And it's just loved every moment with this book. So, anyway, so I've had a glorious reading week, and I finished A World Beneath the Sands yesterday, on Thursday. So that gave me some time to really think about what I wanted to read next. And I decided to stick with history, even though I decided this on Monday, and I'll talk a bit about that later after I talk about what I'll be reading, or I'm continuing reading, and what I will be reading next week. So today I started on Children of Ash and Elm, A History of the Vikings by Neil Price. I've only gotten through the first 30 pages, the prologue and the introduction, and I'm quite enjoying what I've read so far, so I'm looking forward to getting to the meat of the story. And also, once I finish A History of the Vikings, or Children of Ash and Elm, I will then start on Game of Queens, The Women Who Made the 16th Century Europe by Sarah Gristwood. So I'm looking forward to reading that as well. So on Monday, obviously after I made my decision to focus on history, which much like last year, much like most of this year, has pretty much been the literature that I've most enjoyed. I was going to make a video on Monday, really talking about how I'm going to be taking a break from fiction. Not just my bête noir general fiction, but generally all fiction, even my beloved science fiction and fantasy, which hasn't really been doing it for me since 2019. But that video never quite worked how I'd hoped it would, and I generally do struggle with those discussion videos. I mean, I want to make them, but they just never really work for me. One of these days, hopefully, I will get that to work. But anyway, so I decided to just read history. Although, once I do my June book haul, I will probably be reading some manga because I'm a bit insane. And I'll talk a bit more about that in about 2 weeks when I do my book haul for June. So yeah, I'm excited for reading mostly history for the next few weeks or months. Hopefully, I will get back into wanting to, into fiction. Hopefully, definitely by this fall. There are 2 science fiction themed reading events that I'm looking forward to, one of which I am a co-host for. So in September, Thomas of SFF 180 does Space Opera, Space Opera September, where the goal is to read a number of science fiction novels that are in the subgenre of space opera. Think Star Wars or Star Trek. And he has a lot of interesting prompts and challenges and sort of a whole sort of scheme that is quite wonderful. I participated in the first season and then the repeat of the first season in 2020 with since the COVID pandemic sort of scuttled Thomas's plans, which I'm thinking are back on. So whatever he had planned for season 2 is, I think, on the go, but I don't know exactly what they are. And I would like to participate, even though I don't have that much in the way of space opera. Which is maybe something I need to work on to correct. And then in November, there's New Worlds November, which is primarily which is the invention of the Bookish Bryants, in which participants will focus on science fiction, primarily short science fiction, of which I'm going to be a co-host for this event. And I'm looking forward to it, and hopefully I will be back into reading fiction and enjoying fiction by November. That's still quite a few months away, so there's all hope. And so I'm probably going to be focusing on one of my anthologies. I don't know if it's going to be a smaller one or a larger one, while I'm also going to be doing Nonfiction November. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus more on science books in November. So whatever prompts that Olive and the other co-hosts for Nonfiction November come up with, I'm going to try to pretty much find like a science book that will match. And for the themes for New Worlds November, I think I'm going to do like science fiction related science books. I have a book called Imagined Worlds that sort of looks at exobiology, and so maybe try to find which would match the aliens prompt or theme, and I'll go through the other themes and find similar books as well. So anyway, so even though for the moment I'm taking a break from fiction, hopefully I will be back by November. I'm pretty sure I will be, but anyway. So that's my reading plans and some looking forward. So I did watch the episode 2 of Loki, and it was amazing. There were a few, I think, bits that I didn't particularly care for. But for the most part, I really loved the episode. Anything else? I don't think there's anything else. So I'll try to do something on Monday. I don't know what. And then some tags on Tuesday, maybe Thursday. And I don't know if anything, well, I won't do anything on Wednesday because that's Loki time. And then Friday will be weekly reads. So, yeah, we'll see how things go. Tag-wise, because there's a lot of really interesting tags that came out this week that I want to get to next week. Some that might involve a bit more ranting than others, but we'll see how it goes. So anyway, BookTube, I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now. Thank you. Have a great evening and weekend. Happy Juneteenth if you are in the United States. Happy Father's Day. Again, I think if you are in the United States, I don't know. Yeah. And for everyone else, have a great weekend. And I will see you next week. So please, until then, stay safe.